All right. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Conan Smith. I am the president and CEO of the Michigan Environmental Council, and I am excited to have you with us for another Capital Connections webinar. We are going to talk about a really cool topic today. We're joined by Nancy Warren, who is the director of the National Wolf Watcher Coalition. We're going to talk about the wolf population in Michigan. And you may not be aware of this, but the state has only recently released a new management plan for wolves. And Nancy had an integral part in shaping that. And she's going to give us the lowdown on what's in that plan, what it means for our wolf population and our management processes. Some of you may recognize Nancy's name. She's a Petoskey Prize winner, nominated originally from one of our member organizations, the Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition. The Petoskey Prize honors each year an MEC member organization's volunteer who has done extraordinary work in the field. And Nancy, as you will soon come to know through this webinar, is one of those citizen experts who we could not do without. Nancy, thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So before the webinar launched, we started talking a little bit about your path through life, but I didn't get to ask how did wolves become a part of your life? What took you into their space?
Well, I've been involved in environmental causes since the very first Earth Day in 1970. So that really ages me. But I became interested in wolves when I learned that there was a small population in the early 90s here in the UP. And since that time, we have had a resident pack using our property for at least 20 years. I live here in the Western UP, so I'm always thrilled to find tracks. And the more I see wolf tracks, the more I see sign of wolves, the more I want to learn about them.
That's pretty awesome. So it was a casual interaction because of your property, and that developed into a passion for protection.
Actually, it started before we had wolves on our property. I took a course in Wisconsin and saw my first wolf track. And this was back when the state of Wisconsin only had about 20 wolves. And I just stood there in awe of the size of the track. And a funny story there too, we found some wolf scat, and I looked at the coordinator and said, "Can I take some of this home? I have to show everybody what wolf poop looks like." And then it was a few years later when we started finding tracks on our property.
When I was a kid, my mom, who is quite the amateur naturalist, would teach us how to recognize scat and tracks. And I would tell kids at school about it. I was not really the popular kid with that interest, I gotta say.
Well, one of my programs, I do a lot of wolf education programs, and I have wolf scat in a little bottle, and it has a hoof in it, a deer hoof. And one of the fifth graders picked, usually when you're doing it with kids, I'll say, "I've got some wolf poop here," and you hear, "Oh, yuck," and I'll go, "No, this one's really cool. It has a wolf track, a deer hoof in it." And the little fifth grader picked it up and he goes, "Now I know why wolves howl."
Love it.
And I love that, yeah.
Will you tell us a little bit about your organization, what the mission is, and where you all do your work?
Well, the National Wolf Watcher Coalition is an all-volunteer organization. We have no paid staff, so everything we do is because of our passion for wolves. And our motto is to educate, participate, and advocate on behalf of wolves. We're nationwide. We got started only about 14 years ago, so we're a relatively new organization, but we have reached across the aisles, across the state, the country, and even in some foreign countries as well, as far as supporters go. We have no membership dues, which is also another plus for most people. We have a strong presence on all the social media platforms, where we just keep trying to educate the public and let people know the facts about wolves. So That's in a nutshell. I spent a lot of time writing, submitting comments on different wolf plans, serving on committees. We have a really strong core group of volunteers, so who keep up our Facebook page and help write comments and things like that.
I love the dynamism of a truly volunteer and citizen-driven organization. I'm a professional in the movement, and I get a paycheck, which I'm super appreciative for. But everything I do pales in comparison to the work that volunteer organizations do. It's so impressive. Congratulations, and we're grateful for having you all there. So Nancy, the big thing that we want to talk about is the state has a new wolf management plan that came out in 2022. But before we get into the details of that, I think it would be helpful to share with the audience some of the background on Michigan's wolf population, its importance to our ecosystem, our history in terms of our management approach, and the like, where are the wolves in Michigan? How many are there? That sort of thing. Can
For
you give us a
sure.
little background?
Well, this actually goes back 50 years ago when wolves were among the first animal listed under the newly signed Endangered Species Act. So this is the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, and wolves were among the first. And back in 1974, shortly after the Endangered Species Act was signed, an attempt was made to bring 4 wolves to the state. They came from Minnesota. They were released in the Huron Mountains, but unfortunately, within the first 6 months, all these wolves were killed at the hands of man, either trapped, hit by cars, illegally killed. The UP just wasn't ready for wolves. And so no other reintroductions were ever attempted. So all the wolves that are present here in the Michigan came here on their own 4 feet. They came from the Great Lakes region, Minnesota into Wisconsin. Some came from Canada. Wolves are capable of traveling great distances. You may have even read recently a collared wolf that was captured just about 20 miles from my house managed to find its way across Wisconsin into Minnesota, touched in North Dakota, and then went up into Canada and was killed by a hunter in Canada. Wow. So it traveled 4,000 miles. And since it was GPS collared, we knew about it. So our population has remained stable between 600 and 700 animals for more than 10 years, actually about 12 years now. The population is doing really well. You can see from this chart, we started out with the first documentation back in about 1990 when they were first detected. But since that time, they have totally stabilized. And that is consistent with science, which shows that as populations, as wolves populate prime habitat, their populations stabilize. And so that's always good to know too, that it is based on science that this has happened. You'll have some people say, oh, I don't believe the numbers and this can't be accurate or whatever. But again, wolves travel great distances. And so someone might see tracks of 3 or 4 animals in one area and then see those same animals a mile or 2 away and not realize it's the same path. So they will often patrol their entire territory. So any rate, but they're doing well, they're stable, as long as people stop killing them. Illegal killings is still a problem in the state. Some people still think the only good wolf is a dead wolf.
There was a time in my life when I would go up to Isle Royale and backpack, usually in the spring, mostly because nobody's there in the spring, and you could see wolf tracks. You'd sometimes hear them in the middle of the night. Do you know anything about the population that is in Isle Royale, where they came from?
Yes, they're doing really well on Isle Royal. There should be a report coming out very soon. The researchers are on Isle Royal right now. I'm not a total expert on it, but the Isle Royal wolves declined down to 2 animals. And through a very long process, I mean, a very long process, the National Park Service, along with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, finally developed a plan to reintroduce wolves onto Isle Royal, in part because the moose were overbrowsing and the moose population was growing out of proportion. And the island couldn't sustain the high number of moose. And that happened back in the 1920s. And then what happened after they ate up all the foliage, the moose population crashed.
Sure.
So we've got some wolves on the island, some pups were reproduced, and I think the last count was that there's about 23 wolves on the island, but we'll have a more specific number in probably, maybe February, March.
I'll be really interested to see the findings of that study. We've talked a little bit about the impacts of climate change on the wildlife migratory patterns for Isle Royal when the lake doesn't freeze over, and I'm very curious to see how that's impacting both wolves and moose on the island.
Well, it also shows how important a long-term study is. And that can transition into the wolf plan, because you can't just do a study 1 year and develop results, because there are so many things that happen, the factors that impact a wolf population, their predator, climate, the particular weather. For example, if we have a very heavy snowfall like we have this year, that benefits the wolves and doesn't help the deer, because the deer get bogged down in the snow. It makes it easier for the wolves to kill the deer. And then a mild winter could result in the wolves being able to not get the deer, and the wolves suffer because the deer can escape in lower in warmer weather and with less snowfall. So the Isle Royal is the perfect example as to why we need a long-term study.
So the wolf as a species is pretty iconic in American literature and in our imaginations. So beyond the sort of ecological ecosystem value of the species, we also have a lot of trepidation about wolves as people. We've got the big bad wolf, an iconic nursery rhyme character, but also books like Moat's on the wolf population in Canada, Dances with Wolves, a blockbuster movie. Human and wolf interactions are complicated. You've been involved in this space for a long time, and I imagine interfacing with hunters and researchers and tribal leaders, you've been introduced to a lot of those different perspectives on the role of the wolf population in our society. You talk a little bit about those tensions?
Sure. First, I want to say that there are many, many ethical deer hunters in Michigan who support wolf recovery. They understand the role of predator-prey relationships and how complex they are. We have the tribal perspective where they see wolf as the brother. And so you have to table that along with some of the people who think that wolves are stalking children at bus stops. And I've been to many meetings where someone stood up and said, I have a letter from a school bus driver who said he saw wolves stalking the children waiting at the bus stop. And my first thought was, you took time, if that really happened, what did you do? Just watch this wolf? So wolves are not stalking children at bus stops, but it's that fear. And it's partly because wolves are such large animals. When most people see a wolf, at first glance, they think it's a deer because it stands so tall. They have very long legs, and they're a big animal. And then they're also very, very curious. So when you see a wolf, it almost looks like it's looking through you. And it's very curious look. And many people perceive that to be, it's kind of, stalking me, when that's not really the case. It's trying to figure out who you are and what you are. And what's interesting is that we have lived with black bears on the landscape for years. And black bears have been known to kill people. There has not been one case of a wolf attacking a human in Michigan, and very few attacks nationwide. So wolves are relatively safe. The risk to humans is extremely low. And we've got over 15,000 bears just in the UP alone, and only 631 wolves in the UP, yet they're afraid of the wolf. And what I think has happened is that we have grown accustomed to the bears. We know that if a bear comes into my bird feeder, it's time to take down the bird feeder, or you're going to have it. Yeah. So we've learned how to coexist with bears. And I think people just are starting to learn how to coexist with wolves. One other example is I've had people say, I've had wolves in my field, and what do I do? And I'll say to them, are you feeding deer? Well, yeah, I like feeding deer, and so wolves eat deer. So if you're going to be bringing in deer to your property or to your backyard, don't be surprised when a predator shows up.
Sure.
Just like when you're feeding a bird, birds in your bird feeder, you're sometimes going to have a hawk or an eagle come down and take one of your birds. It's all part of the circle of life. And so I tell people, you have to think like a wolf. What does the wolf eat? What's it going to do? And there are ways to coexist.
The management plan is sometimes looked at as a vehicle for creating the opportunity for hunting wolves, but I think the DNR has done a pretty good balancing job in this recent plan. And in fact, the call for sort of protective hunting versus recreational hunting isn't borne out, it sounds like, from the numbers of conflicts that have arisen between wolves and livestock in the Upper Peninsula. And it's where our wolf pack is it is bound to the UP, right? We don't have any in the Lower Peninsula.
Not yet.
Not yet. And so
there may be a wolf running around, but we haven't been able to detect any kind of breeding activity or anything else. So people are advised, if you think you have seen wolf tracks in the Lower Peninsula, especially the northern lower, take a picture of it, take all the evidence and submit it to the DNR, because it is a matter of time. There will be a wolf in the northern lower. There was one caught in a coyote trap about 2014. So we know they have the capacity to get down there.
So I believe you wrote recently that there are tens of thousands of head of livestock in the Upper Peninsula, but over the years we've seen less than a dozen livestock kills that are attributable to wolves. Did I get
Actually, yes. Whenever there is any kind of predation on a farm, the farmer will call DNR. Law enforcement goes out and checks, verifies that it is a wolf kill. Many times it's coyote. But just for an example, we have 50,000 head of cattle in the UP, not counting sheep. We also have sheep and pigs and everything else. Last year only, and we have 1,000 farms, and only 3 farms experienced a problem last year, and we lost a total of 6 calves, which is really minor. Producers lose cattle every year to pneumonia, the cold weather. The weather and those kind of diseases like pneumonia are some of the biggest reasons that livestock dies. We have some issues too, where in Michigan we have what's called the Body of Dead Animals Act, which needs to be enforced a little bit more. We're working to try and get that changed. But when a cow dies a natural death, the farmer is responsible for burying that cattle. Except right now we have about 40 inches of snow on the ground. So it's a little bit difficult to bury a calf that might die this time of year. And so a dead calf laying in a field will attract wolves. But for the most part, wolves have been behaving themselves. I often get asked a question about dogs. And if you run your dog in wolf territory, there's a risk. Just like there's same risk if you run your dog on a highway. You're not going to open up the door and let your dog run across a major I-94 or I-75 because it's the risk of getting hit by a car. But most of the dogs that have been killed by wolves, and last year there were 2, are hunting dogs that are turned loose into wolf territories, and the wolves have killed them. And again, in those situations, the hunter is baiting in bears, so the wolves are attracted to the baits, and then you have the dogs running loose in these areas, and the wolves see the dog as an intruder, just like they would see any other intruder, like a coyote or another wolf, and they will kill the dog.
Do some farmers use dogs as guards for their livestock, and is that an effective intervention?
Yes, the key though, in fact, just today Michigan has, many people don't realize, Michigan has a non-lethal specialist who works with the USDA, and he goes out and works proactively with farmers to try and minimize losses. And I just spoke with him today, and several of the things that work really well is predator-proofing fencing. So if we can keep the wolves and coyotes out of the pasture, that's going to be the biggest non-lethal measure that we can take. Other non-lethal measures include guard dogs. Donkeys are extremely effective. And so those are the 3 main things that they use. So fencing, non-lethal. They also have flashing lights and stuff like that. We also have flaggery, which are essentially orange flags. Some of them are electrified, that the wolves see and are afraid of them. Many of these non-lethal are only temporary results, though. Because wolves eventually learn orange flags are just orange flags. And electric fencing, maybe it's worth it to get that sting. So they alternate and change. Donkeys are extremely effective. We have one farm here, which is about 10 miles from me. And he had a predation back in 2011, got 2 donkeys, still has wolves, but has not had another predation. So wolves and the donkeys don't get along very well.
So 2 of the major aspects of the DNR's new management plan are this emphasis on education, so that we all understand the wolf population better. We understand the nature of its impact on the ecosystem and on our society. Another one is making sure that we are emphasizing those non-lethal measures when there are potential wolf conflicts. The third big area of the plan is helping to understand and define what is a viable wolf population, because there's pressure for recreational hunting, there's pressure for hunting for management, but there's also on the ecological side a desire to see this population healthy, stable, vibrant, and viable. But that word viable can go a lot of different directions. Can you
for sure. What's happened with that is way back in the 1990s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services defined what a viable population is. And a viable population was defined as needing at least 200 wolves for genetic diversity. But what has happened over the years is that viable, many, including the Natural Resource Commission, the legislature, and many hunting organizations have determined or have come to the conclusion that 200 is the cap. And what DNR has said is 200 is what is the minimum population that we need to derive the ecological benefits of wolves. And so with just the 200 animals, it does not provide all the benefits that wolves can provide. And so with the plan, just like in the first two plans, the first plan was in 2016, there was an update in 2015, and now this one being the update in 2022, we did not put a cap on a wolf population. So whatever the landscape can sustain is how many we can have. And instead, the plan focuses on conflicts. So if we have 50 wolves in an area, say in the Western UP, and they're not causing any problems, well then 50 wolves is fine. But we might have an area near a farm where we only have a small wolf pack of maybe 4 or 5 animals, but they're causing problems that we can't resolve. Well, then let's deal with that conflict. So it has a sensible approach, not just an all-out wolf hunt. Science doesn't support an all-out wolf hunt. If you have a problem, you need to direct the problem toward the offending wolf. So if a farmer is having a problem in May, he can't wait till November to have a wolf hunt to resolve that problem.
Right. So the other big question that often comes up then about the management plan is, does the plan recommend a wolf hunt, or how does it approach that issue?
It doesn't. First off, we cannot have a wolf hunt until wolves are delisted. So there is a process. Right now, wolves are on the federal protection, has federal protection under the Endangered Species Act. That has seesawed over the years, but right now they are protected. So they cannot be killed for any reason, even on a farm. Only can be killed in the defense of human life, which is different than Minnesota. Minnesota wolves are considered threatened, and they can be killed on a farm. So first, they would have to lose that protection. If there is ever going to be a hunt for whatever reason, then DNR has to have a public comment period, open it up for public attitudes, and our public attitudes have improved since the last. That's a big plus. Many people now support wolves that didn't support wolves just even 10 years ago. So all that has to happen. And as part of the plan, that's in section 6.12, DNR made a total distinction. They made a distinction of a hunt to resolve conflicts versus a recreational hunt. And so if there is going to be a hunt anytime in the future, I would guess that DNR is going to center it around a conflict resolution. But again, it's going to have to be very, very specific because our conflicts have been very low. And DNR already has the tools to resolve conflicts. So if wolves are delisted and or when they are delisted and there is a problem on a farm, government agents can kill those wolves, and or the farmer can be issued permits that would allow him to kill those wolves. So we already have mechanisms in place to deal with conflict. So personally, I would not support a conflict resolution wolf hunt. And definitely don't want to kill them for fun.
Nancy, it feels like from our conversation that you think that the management plan that DNR has come up with is pretty well balanced. Is that fair?
Yes, that's a fair assessment. What has changed between the 2015 plan and this plan is the lessons learned. As I alluded to with Royale, learning so much more about wolves from a long-term study, that's what's happening here in Michigan and across the country. We have learned so much since the first plan. And the new plan incorporates over 100 scientific publications to support their decisions. So that is another plus that I see with the plan. The plan says wolves will be managed based on the best available science. And that's definitely a plus. As opposed to the myth and fears. DNR has discounted the threats that wolves are killing all the deer. And that's not supported by science. And DNR explained the predator-prey relationship in the plan.
So as we wrap up, you've seen our state come a long way, its approach to wolves. If you were looking way down the path 30 years from now, what would Michigan's wolf population and management approach, the relationships between us and them, what would that look like in your imagination?
Well, in 30 years from now, I'll be 100. So what we need is public support for wolves have improved. And I do believe it's because of educational efforts. And what I would like to see is to pass the torch on to the next generation, to educate, dispel the myths, explain the ecological benefits of wolves. In the state, we have a problem with CWD in our deer population. Research is, we need more research, but there is some research that indicates wolves might be managing the CWD. There are only cases of CWD in the state is in areas where we don't have wolves.
Right.
So wolves can detect disease very early. And so that's what I would hope to see, more research in the role of predator-prey. So if we have any young people on this webinar, they should continue to pursue research, work with researchers. Over Voyager's Wolf Project is doing extensive research on wolves, support those organizations, because I probably won't be around 30 years from now.
Well, we certainly hope you will be. And Nancy, thank you for your leadership thus far. Thank you for taking time with us today. And
thank you.
Trust that we have a whole passel of allies around us who are ready to take up the cause.
And one more last thing, if we didn't get to any questions, people can, and then you can download the chats and send them to me. And if we have the contact information for the people, I will respond to them. But if this brought up any questions, contact me at Nancy at, very easy, wolfwatcher.org, WOLFWATCH.org.
If any of you have questions or put them in the chat and we didn't get to them, know that Bo Brockett on our team will work with Nancy to get them answered. You'll get a follow-up email from us with a link to this webinar as well. Before we go, let me remind folks that we're going to take a week or two off here, but then when we come back, we're going to be talking about this very important effort to retrofit homes across the state for affordability and energy efficiency, a critical aspect of our climate management plan. We'll be joined by Senator Stephanie Chang on February 17th. So I hope that you can join us for that. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. It's been really great to have you on board. Folks in the audience, you all have a wonderful weekend. Get out and enjoy that snow. I'll talk to you all the next time around. Bye-bye.